let's talk about Red Bull, because we mentioned them a little bit in conversation. It feels like a big weekend for them. They've got a bigger lead, or should I say, Max Verstappen has a bigger lead in the Drivers' Championship than Red Bull do in the Constructors, which kind of tells the story of how this year has been. Max is still very much the lead driver in the championship, whereas in the terms of the teams, Red Bull aren't really that lead outfit anymore. And a bigger reason for that is, of course, Sergio Perez. We've obviously heard stories of what could potentially be coming soon, some of the potential clauses in his contract, and the troubling situation he's found himself in. This is a big weekend, given that, as you've mentioned, we don't quite know who's going to be on top this weekend in Hungary. This is a big weekend for Sergio Perez to support Max Verstappen and Red Bull, because the gap in the constructors to the likes of McLaren in particular is shrinking at quite a pace all of a sudden.
Yeah, Max, just quickly to talk about him, as you mentioned, he's got an 84-point lead in the driver standings over Lando Norris. And okay, there's 12 Grand Prix to go, and quickly doing math off the top of my head, 12 Grand Prix plus an additional 3 sprints, you're looking at a total of, I think, 336 points, just off the top of my head, maximum.
Sounds good to me.
Available.
Maths was not
25 for a win. Yeah, 25 for a win. Fastest lap point, let's not forget, 8 points for a sprint victory. So I think that's 336, just doing very quickly the maths.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a chunk of points to play for, but it is an 84-point lead. That is effectively 3 Grand Prix victories and then some on top of that Lando has to claw back in terms of that points gap. So you've got to think that with the way teams are taking points off one another at the top, yes, Max is not dominating the way he has done, but you've got to think that with no one driver, no one team making a significant leap or impact into that lead that Max has, then I would suggest he's relatively safe at this halfway stage of the season. Absolutely, you cannot rule anything out. So I'm not going to say that Max is definitively going to win a 4th consecutive driver's title, but he has a comfortable enough cushion that he should be able to maintain that gap going through to the end of the season. Could still be tight at the end of the year. We never know, but at least it's still providing us intrigue at the halfway stage. Whereas if you think, Nick, going back after race 4 or 5, it was looking like it was going to be another Max domination.
But interestingly, that's an interesting point there, because it's because of that early season domination why he now has this buffer, which in a way kind of shows how useful it was for Red Bull to have come out the block so quickly. Because, if you imagine that McLaren and Mercedes have been there with Red Bull from day one this season, then that 84-point gap probably wouldn't be there. So that's quite a critical thing when you think about it, that Red Bull's early season dominance could actually have a massive say in, Max winning this championship by a canter once again, or whether it does go right down to the wire.
Yeah, as you say, that start, it's spot on assessment, in fairness to you, Nick. It's
I have my moments.
Exactly.
Very few. But...
You have your moment. There you go. You can say, doff your cap for that one. But absolutely. We all thought, we said it on the first few podcasts that we did and F1 updates, that this was looking likely it was going to be another Max walkover, Red Bull domination. And we've not had that. The overriding feeling is, and Christian Horner, the team principal, has mentioned this before, that they are now almost at the peak of the curve in terms of the development of that car, that there is not much left to add to it to try and get it back ahead of its rivals into that dominant position that it has previously enjoyed. As I say, it is at the top of the curve. That's why McLaren and Mercedes, though, have managed to come with their major upgrades. McLaren over the course of the past 12 months, as we know. Mercedes over the course of this season so far, and most definitely from about the quarter way point in total of this particular season, from about race 5 or 6. And now all of a sudden, because it has found that correct path, it is able to make these considerable gains with its own updates that it has been adding to the W15. So at least it is giving us this fascinating constructors championship picture. Mercedes, though, because of its slow start this season, for my money, is just too far back.
Yeah, no,
and I was
agreed.
just about to take a quick look at the championship standings, and they are 152 points behind Red Bull at this stage. That, for me, is too much.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind the number of points that are on offer over the 12 Grand Prix. It's a massive chunk. It's over 500 points when you tally up all the Constructors' Championship points that are available. However, Ferrari 71, okay, we've discussed them to a certain extent, and they really need to, again, turn that corner if they're going to be, again, challenging Red Bull. But for me, it's McLaren that's the fascinating one. They are 78 points adrift. And that, without a shadow of a doubt, is definitely doable. In particular, when you have two drivers at the fore, as Lando and Oscar Piastri are at McLaren, compared to Red Bull right now, that is really, as we've discussed, and I'm going to use the phrase again, fighting with one hand behind its back, because it has one driver in Max Verstappen who is a cut above, and the other driver in Checo Perez in exactly the same machinery that just is not cutting it at the minute. We know Christian Horner has turned around and said, Checo is underperforming. You know, a clear and outright statement as to where he feels the Mexican driver is at. Helmut Marko, in, again, comments coming out of Silverstone, has basically turned around and said he's effectively got these two races in Hungary and Belgium to save his seat, and then we will assess. You can only assume if he doesn't start delivering, and I think we're talking certainly minimum top 5 in terms of a Grand Prix finish, hoped for podium, then they're going to be seriously considering over the summer break replacing Checo Perez.
It's incredible to think that it was only a couple of months ago he was given this 1+1 deal, obviously keeping him for 2025 with the option to extend it through to 2026. Now, of course, it's kind of, become aware there are clauses in this deal which mean he could be gone as soon as after potentially the Belgian Grand Prix and not be at Red Bull for the second half of this season. It's crazy how much that story has turned so quickly. But even Horner has kind of joked himself that they were hoping this contract would, give Sergio some confidence, bring his form back. That hasn't happened for you, though. Obviously nothing's guaranteed. We don't know what's going to happen. But if Sergio were to lose his seat for the second half of the season and going forwards, who do you put in? Because, of course, you've got Liam Lawson, but he did an amazing job replacing Daniel Ricciardo. But to then jump straight into the Red Bull is a lot of pressure for him. Do you go for Yuki Tsunoda, who also has a deal for next year and is performing the best he ever has in the sport? Or do you go for Daniel Ricciardo, who, okay, isn't having a good season in all fairness to him, but has that experience alongside Max and also experience of working with the Red Bull outfit themselves?
It's a great question.
It's such a tough one.
You've only got to see particular comments of people, and even, when I'm talking about our fans, our viewers, our readers, and just looking around generally, and there is this split as to who they feel should go in the car. Some suggest Daniel simply because of his experience. Now, we know he is a Christian Horner favourite. Christian brought him out of the cold following his exit from McLaren, brought him in as the third driver, and as we know, pretty much exactly a year ago, he had that test with the Red Bull, proved himself comfortably in the RB19 of last year because it was a Pirelli test, and he managed to get within, just fractions of a second of the pole time that Max Verstappen had set at last year's British Grand Prix. And that, for Red Bull, was an easy decision to make, to allow them to oust Nick de Vries and bring in Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel, however, barring the odd performance here or there, and even by his own admission, has not performed to the standard that he would have liked, especially at the start of this season, when he made it abundantly clear that his target was for the second Red Bull seat for next season. He was hoping to oust Checo Perez, or not oust, but replace Checo Perez, because Checo's contract was up at the end of this year. That's not happened. he now finds himself very much almost fighting for his seat now at RB. What's going to happen to him, we're not sure. Could he be the one to replace Checo because he is a Christian Horner favourite? He does have the experience. He's fought alongside Max previously. And then, of course, Nick, we've got Yuki Tsunoda, who many believe should be the driver propelled into the Red Bull opportunity, simply because of his longevity in the junior ranks with AlphaTauri, with RB. He signed a new contract, as we know, only recently to continue with RB into 2025. The thing that lets Yuki down for me, and you've got to wonder if this is the same thing within the Red Bull family, is Yuki's temperament. He's worked really hard on that over time, but there are too many instances, from my mind, where he's let himself down with that temperament, and he's voiced his frustration over the radio. He's used expletives, and you've got to wonder, when you've got to feel that if you're going to be Max's teammate, you kind of need a cooler head, particularly when you're fighting at the front, when you're, really fighting for those podiums, those top position points that the team really needs for the constructors. And then you have this young up-and-comer, Liam Lawson, who proved himself in the cameo role for last season when he stood in for Daniel Ricciardo when Daniel broke his hand, or broke a finger in his hand in several places, that kept him out for a handful of Grand Prix, and Liam came in and delivered. Do you give the rookie a chance in that Red Bull seat? It's a real dilemma. Again, I'm going to go back to some Helmut Marko comments, and I'm going to give due credit because they're in his Speed Week column. Speed Week is a publication in Austria, and it has a column, as I say, with Helmut Marko, a regular column, and he often produces some great content within it. And I'm just going to read out the comments because I think they basically say all as to where Helmut Marko's mind is at. And he's basically turned around and said that he's in favour of giving young people a chance in Formula One. And then he says, I can't name any names, but there are drivers in the field who are stagnating and are better or worse depending on the mood. They are blocking the way for the young drivers. The teams are also afraid of juniors. Of course they make mistakes, but I'd rather someone makes mistakes and has hope for the future than there being no further improvement. Now, you can read into that what you like, folks, but for me, that's a finger pointing at Daniel Ricciardo and another finger pointing at Liam Lawson. But we are completely aware of this dynamic that exists inside Red Bull. It's played itself out over the course of this season and in the early part of the season in particular, between Christian Horner, between Helmut Marko and Jos Verstappen. Of course, we all know what entailed at the start of this season. So we know that there's this split, Christian on one side, Helmut on the other. And this is Helmut quite clearly having his say as to who he feels should be promoted, should they decide to jettison Checo over the course of the summer break. It's quite clear he wants Daniel out as well in many respects from what I'm reading into those comments. And he'd love Liam to be given that opportunity. Once again, it's part of that fascinating internal power play that's going on behind the scenes inside Red Bull.